Well, good afternoon. I tell you, I'm excited about this next guest. He's a good friend, he's a father, he's a husband. And what I'm excited about, though, is he's going to bring an electrifying topic, one that's been in the news lately, but it's even beyond that. I mean, this is something that Joel Freeman, my guest, has been studying for decades. One topic in particular that we're going to address today on Victorious Friday is this idea that parents, are you ready for your children in this George Floyd era? Joel Freeman, welcome to the show, my friend.
Terence, it's so good to see you. You're looking
It's
younger and younger every time I see you.
well, it's that my wife keeps me young and keeps me running. So, well, buddy, before we start, tell the audience a little bit about you, who you are, your organization, and this amazing project we're going to be talking about around Black history in a minute. But just tell them a little bit about who you are, kind of your background, and what's on your heart.
Well, I was raised in Canada, left home when I was 17, hitchhiked probably 6,000 miles around North America, long-haired hippie, dope smoking fool, and had a conversion experience. I was out on the road for close to 2 years. Conversion experience on September 10th, 1972. Signed up for Bible school the next day. And I could show you a picture of me the way I looked back then. And 7 years later, I became one of the first chaplains in the history of the NBA with the Washington Bullets at the time, now the Wizards. And I did that for 20 seasons. Ended up surviving 6 coaching changes, and that to me is the biggest miracle. But from 78 to 98, those 20 years were really quite a remarkable roller coaster ride. It just was an incredible experience. It was during that time I became very interested in Black history, and it kind of happened where the players, of course, their position in life attracts a lot of insincere people. And so they were looking at me because, when I started, I was 25, I looked 15, and they're thinking, I'm supposed to spill my guts to that guy? You got to be kidding me. And so they began to test the seams of my soul by asking questions. What did Jesus look like? What part did people of African descent play in biblical and extra biblical history? And I didn't have a clue. So it's launched a whole learning experience, a listening experience. I ended up co-writing this book here, Return to Glory, subtitled The Powerful Stirring of the Black Race. And as you can see, Dr. J, Julius Irving endorsed it, and Tony Evans and a number of others. Ended up making a film version out of this book that is now in French, Portuguese, Spanish, English subtitles. And it's been seen by millions of people around the world. And then this is actually the connection to Dr. Walter Milton in what we're going to talk about today, perhaps, is a young man. He was superintendent of schools in Springfield, Illinois, and a young man who worked for the National Park Service. Of course, that's Abraham Lincoln country. And so he had read this book, and he kept bugging me and Walter Milton to connect. He says, you guys need to connect. And he kept at it for so long, we ended up connecting. I ended up going out doing some training for him and his cabinet. And we developed this tremendous friendship about 2 decades ago. And then about 2.5 years ago, he called me and he said, hey, Joel, I know you got a Black history collection. I know you have been studying. I know you've been writing about this topic. He says, let's do a Black history curriculum together. And so we ended up, I'll show you this right here. This is the textbook that was just
Wow.
launched a few months ago.
Man, that's beautiful.
About 2.5 inches thick. It weighs 5.5 pounds. It has about 2,567 images in the textbook, and about 1/5 of those images are straight from my collection. So
Wow.
about 525 images are from the collection. So it's pretty exciting. The collection, by the way, is it's over 3,000 pieces. The oldest piece dates back to 1553. Done 2 exhibits at the United Nations. We had over 1 million visitors at the Visitor Center at the UN in New York. And now they're doing an international exhibit with some of the items. And then I've done 3 exhibits in connection with the White House, 2 with the Clinton Presidential Library, a whole bunch of exhibits at the Secret Service headquarters in DC, and a bunch of other places. So when Walter called, little did he, well, maybe he realized that this is something I have been thinking about for a long time,
Yeah.
about doing something like this. So the collection really fit together like hand in a glove.
I was just thinking because we've been talking for a while, and at some point you were actually talking about a museum for over your 3,000 exhibits, and what I just realized as you were sharing is that you now have a museum of most of your artifacts in this new project,
That's
this
right.
Black History book study guide. I mean, you actually have a virtual museum in a sense and a hard copy of your artifacts. So it's
Yeah,
amazing, Joe, how the Lord answers our prayers, but maybe in a different way than what we originally think they might be.
yeah, and we're planning to do a virtual museum
Yeah,
with a lot of the images. That's planned for February.
yeah.
And we have some music that we're launching in February, 41 songs, 1 song per chapter, like an anthology of Black history. And then we're going to be, and being in this textbook, having all these images, we're planning to do a lot of supplemental projects and have a new book coming out in about 10 months that's going to rock the nation.
Wow. I'm sitting here, Joel. I hope people don't take this the wrong way because you know me and I know you, but man, I'm sitting here, I'm looking at this Beatles guy, all this stuff. I'm looking at, and this guy has a heart for Black history, right? How did you even get involved in that whole era? I know it probably started, like you say, with Washington bullets and different things, but what pricked your heart to kind of even venture down this road?
Well, growing up in Canada, a small town of 2,000 people with 9 ice hockey rinks, the whole idea of black, white, was something that was kind of unique to me because the small town of 2,000 people is a place called Prairie Bible Institute, Three Hills, Alberta, Canada. And many watching this maybe have heard of PBI, Prairie Bible Institute. And so it was nothing to be walking down the street and there's someone from Fiji, and there's someone from Russia, there's another person from Ghana, and so we had the United Nations in this Bible school training disciplined soldiers for Christ. In this as a young kid, it was around me, and I had a business as a young kid where I would shine shoes for the Bible school students. So I'd be going, they called it the JK dorm. I would go to this dorm every Saturday morning after I finished chores at the house, and I would shine shoes and come home with my pockets bulging with dimes and quarters and nickels and pennies and all kinds of stuff. Some guys were so poor they bartered with me, and so it was something that it was. We'd have people over for dinner all the time. So really, that was, I would have to say that was the genesis of God preparing me. It's just like the Apostle Paul, and I'm not comparing myself to the Apostle Paul, but you can see how he was raised in Tarsus in kind of an eclectic Jewish family. So when it came time, he came from the Hillel school, not the Shammai school, which was more rigid, but the Hillel school. And he, when it came time for this gospel of grace and everything else, God had prepared him. And in many ways, I feel that God has prepared me for this particular mission, if you will. And then, of course, working with the NBA athletes, the questions they asked that forced me to start studying. And then it was really the Bible. It was not even the social or the justice issues that drew me in, although those are compelling on their own merit. It was the Bible and Isaiah chapter 18. In this book, we do it in exegesis, verse by verse, of Isaiah 18 that talks about people from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia who are tall, smooth of skin, awesome to be feared. In the King Jimmy version, it says they're terrible from the beginning onward. And so I knew the Bible is not given to hyperbole or exaggeration. So therefore, that phrase, terrible from the beginning onward, forced me to start studying about all the extra biblical information that would corroborate that in that time, around 523, 525 BC. And then, of course, in Nahum chapter 3, it says that the power of Egypt was beyond measure, was unrivaled, and once again, not given to hyperbole or exaggeration. So around the same time period that Nahum 3 was written. So that was the biblical aspect is what drew me in. And then the caboose on the train came the social and the justice and all the other aspects that came with it.
Oh, that is so good, you know. Well, let's jump into this Black History project that the Lord has just really moved in a mighty way. And you know, one before I do, I want to kind of set it up with some thought questions. And I'm thinking about parents, right? What Victoria's family deals with is how to raise up this next generation of children who's going to fall madly in love with Christ. And we know that's through the power of the Holy Spirit. But one of the things that I think if I look at 2020, there's many things to talk about. Obviously, the pandemic, obviously, the election, obviously, you know, racial tension, and so many other things. How do we bring up our children in this age of what I'm going to call George Floyd? How do we bring up our children in this age? And what role obviously parents in the church have to play to unify and to reconcile and to break down the divisions that we see. What's just some of the thoughts on your mind around that issue? How
Well,
do we
you know,
raise up our children in this George Floyd era?
yeah, young kids are raised in a different environment than, let's say, you and I were, or even the way we raised our kids. There's a whole. I mean, I came late to the digital revolution, and I've had to really ramp up. But our kids, I mean, intuitively, they'll go up to a TV screen and start swiping, swipe left, swipe right, whatever, and try to get that to interact with the TV screen. And so it's a whole different environment, and it's one where there's easily accessible information. For instance, I was talking with an atheist, and I said, "Here, I'd like to share with you a book to read." And then he did an online search for reviews about the book. And he says, "I don't need to read that. I already know what it says." And I thought to myself, okay, when I was a kid, I didn't have access to that. I would have to labor through the book and come up with my own responses. But now, with all this information there and all these opinions that are already set in stone, so to speak, on social media and other sources, it's a fascinating time. So kids, I think today are quicker with a response, a question, and questioning a lot of things because they see a lot of stuff coming at them. It's a whole lot to absorb. And so when it comes to developing something like what we have done here, we've developed what I like to think is a solution. Is that we know it has to be tech savvy, and I think for parents to not shrink away from kids being growing up in a George Floyd area, because everybody protests. We all protest in different ways. We see injustices, and some people protest through comedy. We have Dave Chappelle, and all the different comedians that tell a joke, get people laughing, and boom, hit them with something. Other people use art. Some people use poetry. Some people write. Some people march. Some people use music as a protest. For instance, during the '60s, we had protest songs, and a lot of rap and hip hop music. It has a subtext of protesting about different things in some way. And so I'm a big fan of protesting. I think that we need to speak power. In fact, speak truth to power. In fact, and we look at Frederick Douglass. He made a comment about this in one of his writings that power does not step down easily. It has to be met with some type of protest. And if we're a fan of what Frederick Douglass has written about other things, I think it's equally important to be a fan of what he has written about that particular topic. But I think there's a way of protesting that is more solutional. In fact, Dr. Milton, I hope you get to meet him sometime soon. He is just the most wonderful, marvelous individual. I just can't believe that I was able to do this project with someone of his character. And but the way we protest is by putting in 2.5 years of 12 to 16-hour days to develop a solution to the education gap in America. And not the solution, but a solution. And so what we've done is we've created something that what has informed every aspect of this are four things. Number one, that we want to have people, to inviting readers, because this engages all ages, not just students, but because I think we're all students, lifelong learners. But we want to invite people to, number one, to become critical thinkers. So with parents and children, it's like, okay, my child agrees with something. The follow-up question could be, why do you agree? Or my child disagrees with something. The follow-up question could be, why do you disagree? So that we don't just take things at face value. We dig deeper, because this generation especially is involved in that and has a lot of access to tools and resources out there to help in that journey. And a lot of knowledge, but not a whole lot of wisdom, may I add. But so it's the first thing we're inviting people to is to become critical thinkers. Number two, to become compassionate listeners. There's two ears, one mouth. There's a parable there somewhere. To listen at least twice as much as speaking, and that's my story. Is I've learned a whole lot more. In fact, when I was studying to write this, my part of this book, I went on a listening tour where I just listened and listened some more and then listened some more. And I asked open-ended questions, and I was looking for a certain target audience of African American males to try to figure things out. And I knew that if I talked with one man, and this was specifically for young men, but and a lot of women love this book, but we wanted to reach a certain target audience of 12 to 27 years of age. And I wanted to talk to men that had some perspective. And so I found that on a suspicion scale, from somewhat suspicious to extremely suspicious, we're banging on the extremely suspicious end of the scale. So by asking questions and listening to, not forming another question in my mind while I'm listening or hearing them talk, but truly actively listening with someone and parking on their doorstep. And so the first thing, of course, critical thinking, compassionate listening, but that's not all, because then fact-based, respectful communication, I think, is important. And I think as parents with our children, that it's so easy, especially in this age of Facebook and everything, is that we can end up talking at each other or talking past each other. And then what ends up is that we end up blocking people on Facebook and stuff like that. And they say that 7%, 5 to 7% of communication is content. About 38% is how we say it, decibel level and tone and all those things. And then about 55% is body language. And what happens on social media is we're only connecting with people at 5 to 7%. And so when I see things that are a high level of complexity, high level of importance, high level of potential impact on relationship, I want to be face to face with people. So I think with our as parents with children is to think about, okay, I'm not going to deal with this on a text relationship or a email relationship, because I'm only communicating at that level. On the phone, I'm maybe at 38% to 40%, 45%, I'm sorry, communication level. And then, but if I can get face to face, if we can defer it and talk when we're together. So if you're separated from your children, they're at school or they live in another state, wait until there's a time when you get together and then really get a sense of the body language of that child, or wait till they get home if they're younger and still living at home. So it's those three: critical thinking, compassionate listening, and respectful fact-based communication. But that's not all, because we've been doing that for decades and decades as a nation and as parents. It's the fourth, I think, is built upon the first three, and that is action-oriented, becoming action-oriented solutionists. And because a lot of people moan and complain about this and that, and why is the black hair care industry owned, 90% by Asians? And why didn't someone do about that? How are we going to repair the infrastructures of our cities? What about police and community engagement? Well, I think it's important to develop solutions to these things. And that's what Walter and I are all about, is that we saw, in fact, what we're hearing, when you're in a jar, you can't read the label. But people are now reading the label and using terms like historic and groundbreaking. I'm even uncomfortable sharing those words. But we had James Meredith, who's an icon in civil rights history in the 60s. And he said this is the finest textbook he's ever seen. And that's his words. And it's just mind blowing to us. We want to bring something that America hasn't seen yet. And a lot of great supplemental material out there from what we're hearing and understanding, and our research indicates that. But what we're hearing from all educators is that there's been never a comprehensive K through 12 curriculum. And every time there's a racially charged incident in America, there's some talking head that gets on TV and all over TV. There's talking heads that say, and you just listen for it. And they say, we need to have a national conversation about race relations in America. And what our desire is to create something that starts those conversations in a contextualized format, those tough conversations at kindergarten, all the way through, and then follow kids in schools, public school, Title I schools, charter schools, home schools, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, corporate America, to follow these individuals through, 3 years from now, 5 years now, 10 years from now, and provide the resources, the tools to be able to do this. Because everything we're doing, this whole book is built around uncomfortability. Anytime you bring this up, if a black guy and a white guy start talking, and then the white guy says, "Hey, my forebears, they come from Italy, or they come from Ireland, or something like that, and we had nothing to do with the slave trade. They came in the early 1900s or late 1800s, and nothing to do with slave trade." So, and immediately, the eyes of the black guy glaze over and say, "Okay, I know we can talk about sports. We might be able to talk about some aspects of religion, might be able to talk about the weather, but I know this is verboten. I am not going to go that way with this person." And so it becomes an unspoken rule in terms of race relations, that these uncomfortable topics come up and people immediately respond without listening, without thinking, and speaking respectfully and fact-based. And so I think this is a very important component. It's probably a long-winded response to your question, but kind of welding the question with my personal experience in terms of coming up with some type of a resource.
Joe, no, I absolutely love those 4 points, and I'm glad that let's even go deeper, right? So we know, I mean, we've been dealing with this issue for centuries. Um, but I'm also reminded, I remember a business trip I took a few years ago to Singapore at the invitation of Forbes magazine. And Mr. Forbes had invited some of the top world leaders in all around from all around the globe. And I don't know how I snuck in. I think they probably just needed someone to, I don't know, to carry some bags or something. I don't know, but somehow I don't know how I made the cut. It was all billionaires in the room. Everyone from Alibaba, owner of Alibaba, to, you know, um, um,
Jack.
big time people, Apple computer and blah, 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 blah. And then little old me in the room talking about managing through values and presenting that type of topic versus we would always think about other ways to manage people and businesses. But I was having a conversation with some of the business people in that room, and one guy in particular, I remember, he's from California and he had made a trip as well. He owns several businesses international. And we were just kind of talking. I said, man, I'm looking around the room. These are the top business leaders in the world. And a lot of people don't look like us from America, right? They look differently. And although there's a lot of people of color in that room, but they did not from America. They look like us. And he says, listen, Terence, there comes a time that you have to stop thinking about race. Yeah, you're not a color. You're a business guy that's bringing value to this discussion. And I'm wondering, as I'm thinking about it, because I grew up in my corporate world was, places like Johnson & Johnson, Citibank, and Coca-Cola, and a lot of times the only one in the room, the only one in the boardroom. and these racial tensions you try to put behind you, although I grew up in a very hostile racial tension environment in the 60s in Chicago, which is probably one of the most people talk about the South, but they don't realize how segregated Chicago and the Midwest was. But what's the elephant in the room here? We want to talk about the issues, but we don't want to talk about the issues. It brings so much division and disunity and so forth. What did you find through all of your research, all of your studies? What's the elephant in the room that we just can't seem to find a workable solution?
Well, I think there's first of all, it's an uncomfortable topic, and for some reason, and in the textbook we talk about scientific racism. We talk about Sir Francis Galton and other aspects of eugenics and those types of things that have helped. It even goes back to the 1500s with regard to the great chain of being in the British Empire, that God and angels occupied the first five stages. And then you had this chain of being, and black people were two links of the chain below white people, and that the lower parts of the chain were there to serve the upper parts of the chain. And so all of this stuff began, for centuries, bringing us to the place then the pejorative view of black people in order to create the whole slave trade. We have the Arab slave trade from the late 600s, going across the north part of Africa for 60 years, and then demanding tribute of slaves every year. And then the pool of slaves began to diminish, and they had to go into the interior of Africa to satisfy the demand. The Portuguese, seeing what the Arabs were doing later on, and then the Dutch and the Spanish and the French, and then ultimately the British decide they control the whole project, the whole aspect of the slave trade, and then this triangular slave trade developing. All of that, we have this history behind us that has been written and codified by the victors, if you will. And I think now what is happening is that the people who were the butt of the ones that had to deal with this, that the diaspora, if you will, are now saying, wait a minute, we have a rich history, ancient Africa, the kingdoms that transcend the current geopolitical lines. All of these things are the folkways, the mores, and the values, and the agriculture, and the hunting, the gathering, the fishing, the industry of ancient Africa, the creativity, the genius. Wait a minute, there's a whole nother context here. Because you bring all that into the boardroom, as you say, or into a school, or into a community-based organization, or any other type of setting, church, faith-based organization. There's stuff there. There's layers to this that are very hard to define. It's like trying to wrestle smoke. And so the church will be against abortion, rightfully so. The church will be against various other moral issues, and rightfully so. And not just against, but for things, and rightfully so. But when it comes to this whole issue of race relations, all I can say, Terence, is there is a certain uncomfortability, a certain, I don't know, it's call it the elephant in the room type of situation. And that's what I think is important, why it's important to start in kindergarten to talking about these uncomfortable situations. Now, we have a lot of things going on in terms of microaggressions, critical race theory, the triggering and safe places. And when something uncomfortable happens, people say, "Stay away from me. You're triggering me, or you're making me uncomfortable." And all that stuff that's happening nowadays, it's like, on one level, it's like crazy. On another level, it's very real that people that this is happening in our culture, and it's something we just can't push it out and just call it stupidity and snowflakes and all the rest of it, because there are people that are involved in these types of things and this type of mentality. And so I think what we do is we need to build muscles in this area, because if we don't talk about the tough topics, atrophy sets in, And then, of course, the path of least resistance emerges. And next thing you know, it's just something we don't talk about that. We're not going to preach about that. We're not going to discuss that. And so if I could refer back to this textbook, what we have developed is something called the elephant experience. And it's a proprietary process that we've created that is designed. I guess the best way I can describe it is let's say you're at a Thai restaurant or Chinese restaurant or a Mexican restaurant, and you open up the menu, and then you look at a dish and you notice it has a little red pepper next to it, and you intuitively know, wow, that's going to be hot and spicy. Now, some people, they're only looking for the red pepper dishes to order and making their choice out of those options alone. Other people are saying, whenever I see a red pepper, I'm running for the hills. Feet don't fail me now. I'm leaving those options. And that's what happens, I think. The elephant in the room, the reason why we chose an elephant is number one, the connection with Africa. Number two, the obvious metaphor. Hey, there's an elephant in the room. Number three, probably your favorite joke. I know perhaps my favorite joke in second grade was, how do you eat an elephant? And, it's the response is one spoonful or one bite at a time. So there has to be a schema, a process, a methodology for dealing with the elephant in the room. And then, fourthly, an elephant has an enormous hippocampus. Their EQ measures or rivals that of a chimpanzee and some species of dolphins. Excuse me. And so, in fact, I should be coughing here, but I have no one else in the room, so I'll cough here and then wash my hands later. But what happens is that you have it has to be something that's sticky, something that is engaging, something that connects with people in this age, with QR codes, with music, with all these different things. So we have a song called "The Elephant in the Room," and we have this thing called the elephant experience. So anytime a student sees, or a parent, because parents are troubled by this whole topic, and superintendents are saying, "Oh no, oh no, no, no! Oh, we're doing Black History here. Oh, I can just see it now. I'm going to be getting, he or she might say, I'm going to be getting 150 calls from parents who are ticked off because you show pictures in the textbook of lynching. You have pejorative images in slavery. You have issues that are brought up that we're uncomfortable with, because we deal with stuff. We come straight at it, but we prepare the students in advance. And I think that with parents listening and watching, it is so important to develop rules of engagement. Because the worst thing one can do is just jump into the pool without knowing how to swim. And the thing is as the first class, we have a whole professional development team, because we're not teaching math. 2 + 2 = 4. Here's the teacher's guide. Go teach. It's more of a transactional deal. Ours is more missional, where we come alongside the instructors, and we have professional development where we go through something called from cultural competence to cultural humility. So it's from knowledge, head knowledge, to heart knowledge, to wisdom, if you will. And we help each instructor one-on-one, sometimes in groups. We come alongside them to help them. And so I think it's important for parents to understand these dynamics, so that they help the students develop their own code of conduct, if you will, or their own set of operating principles or rules of engagement. And so it's made up of "we will" and "we will not" statements. And then the second class, what we do is we have, this is something from the mid 1800s, from the Chokwe tribe of Angola. It's part of my collection.
Wow.
About 15, 16 inches long. If you notice very carefully, the chief or the king is at the top, and he's playing something called, we know it as a kalimba. It's marimba.
Oh, wow.
It's a thumb piano. And what one historian told me is the reason why he's playing a musical instrument, he's at the top because he has preeminence. But the reason why he's playing a musical instrument is because music has a transcendent quality to it. So he is making sense, he is relevant, and he's connecting with the younger and the older generation. So just think of that as a very important part in the mid 1800s, to think at that level of a talking stick. Now, what's a talking stick? Talking stick is when the chief or the king is in the tribal council, he hands it to someone else in the tribal council. Whoever is holding the stick has the authority to speak, and everyone else has the authority to listen. And so we were thinking about how to do this. And of course, in marriage counseling, you have the listening mat and the speaking mat. You know, the one spouse stands on one, the other stands on the other, and then they switch. And whoever's standing on whichever's mat, they get to do whatever they do, listen or talk. And so we were thinking about, well, do we do a downloadable mat, you know, a speaking mat and a listening mat? How do you handle a 25 member classroom, you know, students, 25 students in a classroom, or on a let's say a Zoom call or something like that? And so we're going to have the students create their own talking stick after they've created a whole list of things that are important for communication, feedback, questions, a tone, all those types of things. And then they're going to grab a hold of 5 to 10 of those and maybe affix to their stick. In fact, some schools might be tough where they have to use a pool noodle, a 16-inch pool noodle, so no one uses it as a weapon if they don't feel heard, listened to. And so, but they'll affix like a button, which means that this reminds me as a speaker to remain open with everybody, or maybe affix a feather so I have wings to get to the point and make my point.
You've given me an idea for my family, because our kids, you know, we love conversation. And so I'm thinking this Christmas, as we have our family gathering, and we have our devotional time, I'm thinking about, I've got to come up with my conversation stick. So now you've motivated me so I can control the communication and the conversation. So I'll be using that stick. Joe, let me do this. I want to jump into this phenomenal project that you've been working on, laboring, I think, for a couple of years, this Black History curriculum. And some may think it's just for one, you know, ethnic group or the other, but really, I think this curriculum is for everyone. And everyone can benefit from this curriculum and the history of, you know, of millions of people that reside here in America, but also billions of people that resides around the world. Talk to me about, let's move to that curriculum, that project. Um, why is it so important that we study Black history? And what does this project brings forth that might have been absent in other Black history curriculums or teachings in the past?
Wow, that's a loaded, wonderful question. It's the way I look at it this way is I look at it this way. If someone watching this gets out a piece of paper or just imagines with me and draws a circle in terms of what is in your comfort zone. And some people, they might say traveling, talking, um, sports, you know, and listing all these things, theology, and that's in my comfort zone. And then write what's in outside that comfort zone. It might be listening. It might be something else. Some places to travel might be outside my comfort zone. And if someone's really honest, sometimes it's uncomfortable bringing up topics or talking about certain topics with people of other ethnicities or other races or other genders or other ages, young, old, whatever it is. And so I think what's cool about it is the stuff that's inside the circle is going to happen naturally. You know, it's just going to happen because it's comfortable. The stuff outside, I think when God looks at us, and I have no scripture to support this, but it's just my imagination of God, is that when he sees someone, for instance, who is talkative and it's easy for them to evangelize, but outside the comfort zone is to become contemplative, to study scripture, to pray for 4 hours. And he sees that person who is comfortable with all the being 10 miles wide, 3 inches deep, and being here and there and talking with everybody. And he sees that person on their knees. I think he says, he looks over the banister of heaven. He goes, oh my goodness, this person's got my attention. And then someone who is contemplative, who is cautious, who analyzes everything. But then that person decides, I'm going to learn how to be an evangelist and a witness. I'm going to witness. I'm going to get tracts. I'm going to go out in the highways and byways. I'm going to be a street preacher. I'm going to do something outside of my comfort zone. I think then God again looks over his banister of heaven, and he says, oh my goodness, this person's got my attention. So when it comes to race relations, I think that when we step outside of our comfort zone in that area, I think there's something about that he says, wow, I really, I'm drawn to this, because we know when we get to heaven, every ethnicity, every tongue, every kindred, every nation is going to be in heaven. We see that in the book of Revelation. And there's something about Jesus, the way he dealt with the Syrophoenician woman. He didn't just say that she was a woman. He called her a Syrophoenician woman. We see that lineage of people throughout the Old Testament. We look at the lineage of Jesus in the book of Matthew and the book of Gospel of Luke. We see that the Roman centurion, wasn't just a centurion, he's a Roman centurion, he's an Italian. We see all the people that came at the time of Pentecost, and they're mentioned from different parts of the world. There's something about the way God has designed this. He is so interested in variety. He's so interested in one blood. Acts 17, we're all one blood. Scratch me, it's red. Scratch you, it's red. A red blood. But it's the whole idea of seeing people come together at the foot of the cross. And so this area right here, what we've tried to do as a tool is to create something around Black history. Why Black history? Well, we know with George Floyd, something a button has been pushed, a light switch has been flicked on. And like you said early on, are you ready for me? Students coming to school this year. Some students have been in protest. Some students have been actively on social media, putting up memes and things like that. Some students have been making videos and things like that. Are you ready for me? And I think as parents, that to take a look at how we can become conversant around Black history and show some intellectual curiosity, some heart curiosity, and not just a momentary curiosity. It's like someone walking by who has a blue mohawk and tattoos all over their face, all over their body. And it's like, whoa, wow, that was different. That was unique. And then we move on and we go to McDonald's. We go on about our rest of our day. But I'm talking about 24/7 curiosity. I'm talking about something where we really take the time, a long term, that we become curious about something. And I think Black history is a wonderful place to start. And this textbook, the elephant experience, for instance, we actually provide little elephant experiences around topics like 3/5 of a human being, Uncle Tom, the N word, reparations, should we tear the statues down, scientific racism, can a white person ever fully understand the Black experience in America? Are we in a post-racial society after having a Black president for 2 terms? And the list goes on and on. And I think that it provides a tremendous way historically, through the historic lens, through that gateway. I'm a big fan of gateways. If I'm talking with someone and music is their gateway or sports is their gateway, I'm looking for that gateway. And as parents with children, you have 3 children. The gateway for each of the 3 children is going to be different. And it might be video games. It might be, I don't know, all kinds of different gateways. Well, I think that history is a wonderful gateway because it can be corroborated by original sources. And we have about 35, 36 pages in the back of showing the wells that we drew our water from in the textbook, and corroborating every source, everything we say with original sources where possible, providing original imaging as much as possible. And that way that people can begin to say, okay, I can take my antennas down. I can trust this resource. To bring on people like Ambassador Andrew Young, Smokey Robinson, Kathy Hughes, Alveda King, Benjamin Crump, people from all different walks of life and different sides of the aisle, if you will, politically, to bring them together and to say, every school needs this, every family needs this. on whether it's a CNN or MSNBC or Fox or OWN or Newsmax or whatever it might be, to be able to have people from all different walks. Because in this topic, it can either be too militant or not militant enough. It can be too up, too Pollyanna-ish, or like, oh, they were just playing ukuleles down by the Swanee River and everyone was having fun, or too down, too depressing, too shaming, or it can be too right, too left politically. And so we developed this thing, this razor's edge that we call truth centrism. You have Afrocentrism, you have Eurocentrism. We call this truth centrism. In fact, I have a website called truthcentrism.com, and where I give even-handed critiques of both and definitions of both, and then introduce the whole topic of truth centrism. And so this is where what I think is so important. And I'll shut up so you can ask the next question.
No, it's good, my friend. I'm sitting here. I'm just so there's so many. We could probably go for another 3, 4 hours, but we don't have that type of time. People will turn us out, and our truthsism will never get across to anyone. But I'm going to wrap up with two questions. One is a quick one, and one is I want you to elaborate and close. The first question is, this is a phenomenal curriculum and book materials. How can I get it? Number one, in terms of if I'm a parent, I'm interested. And two, when do you expect it in schools? Is it out now? One, how can I get my hands on this if I'm a parent?
Well, first of all, it's bh365.org. So it's BH for Black History, 365 for every day of the year instead of just February. So it's bh365.org, and
Okay.
there's a lot of information.
Okay.
And one thing that they will enjoy is on the back cover, we have the units. We have 10 units. We start in ancient Africa because we don't want to reinforce the notion that Black history was the start or Black history started with slavery or the slave trade. Then we go to this gentle timeline all the way through to the civil rights and American justice. And then we talk about the economic system. We talk about Black culture and influence. We talk about the 50 stars, which is uh, it's we have Black history from all the 50 states plus DC, and then we end in Canada, because the unspoken question people have in their heads is what happened to the freedom seekers that left the South and moved north, and then the fugitive slave laws pushed them into Canada. What happened to them? So we have a whole unit called the North Star that talks about from Vancouver to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and everything in between. We have a timeline from 1491 all the way to present time that details the connection between U.S. and Canada and Black history. And so all of
See, I
that.
needed this book a few months ago, Joel, because I think about my kids, right? And honestly, a few years ago, I have these conversations with them around racism and race and so forth, and they say, "Oh, Dad, that's old school. That's your day. It doesn't apply today. We're all fine." And then things like George Floyd hit, and they got a wake up call that things were not all fine. And then all of a sudden, they became these like totally transformed. We got to deal with this somehow. And I can honestly say, I wish I would have had your curriculum, your book, because although I've lived through this, I was not prepared for the conversations that they would come forth with. In fact, I believe it's one of the core conversations that people have had in 2020 that have made a great deal of changes that's different than kind of the old stumps that we used to go through. But here's why I want to go in this last question. We're in this postmodern society. Truth is whatever you say truth is and whatever we want to believe truth to be. But yet we know that there is a truth that's everlasting, past, present, and future. And we also know that he made us all unique. And we all have this intrinsic value that if we learn how to harness that value together in unity, this nation and nations around the world would be able to thrive in a way we never could have imagined. So instead of separating us and instead of disunifying us and division, unity is that thing with uniqueness. It's not blending it all together, but it's unity with this diversity that's unique that makes this country so amazing. And really, that makes the world so amazing. So I want you to look into that camera in the last few minutes we have left. We started this as parents, are you ready for your children in this George Floyd era, we're calling it, this postmodern era as well? And give our parents some words of wisdom, Joel, from your experience, from your life, from your readings, books, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do we prepare? How do we get these parents ready? What do they need to get ready for? And what do you see is the future going forward in this post George Floyd era? Just and then I'll give you just wrap it up anywhere you want to wrap it up. But I want to give you the closing remarks as we wrap up.
Well, I think that first of all, it's very important to have a desire to first start praying about it. I think prayer is a great way just to kind of just to talk to the Lord and ask the Holy Spirit and be led to scriptures that will help to illuminate and open up one's mind and heart to some new areas of thinking. And then I think that will create more of a curiosity, long-term curiosity. I'm not saying this is for everybody, but I know that for me, this is pre-digital. I would go to the library once a week and get videos out, and I watched Eyes on the Prize Part One, Eyes on the Prize Part Two. I watched Basil Davidson's BBC 8-part series called Africa: A Voyage of Discovery. And there's just so many other PBS and just things that you can watch that will really help to understand about Black Wall Street and about some of the things that have happened, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think to approach it like I call it blades of grass in a concrete jungle. The concrete is a metaphor for all the horrific things that have happened, and the blades of grass are the people that came up through the concrete. So the thicker the concrete, the more inspirational the story. And to be able to view it from that perspective, to look at the bad and the ugly, and to understand in the context that wow, there were people who actually came through that stuff and became like Annie Malone in the early 1920s. She became the first Black millionaires. She employed over 75,000 women entrepreneurs. She was the first Mary Kay, the first Avon, developing hair care and beauty products. And yet hardly anyone's heard about her. She's the one who's the mentor for Madam C.J. Walker. And she helped so many people in a time to think of all that was coming against her as an African American female, and still what she achieved and the kinds of inspiration she gave, not just the people in her time, but for you and I as we study her life. Her legacy still lives on within us and inspires us to want to be better human beings in serving God. But I'd like to close with this: that I think that it was Augustine that said this, and there's, if you go online, you can see that there's others that have been attributed to, but let's go with Augustine, the fourth century. He said, "Seek to understand before seeking to be understood." Now, this it's like just pretend we're at Ruth Chris Steakhouse and you just put a big fat piece of steak in your mouth. You're rolling it around, and just contemplate, cogitate on those words. Seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. Now, what that means is that it's important to ask open-ended questions, to listen actively, and to listen some more, and to ask more open-ended questions, to think to those aspects. And and then what happens is that it says before seeking to be understood. In other words, there's a chronological sequence. So if you're having challenges with your child, a coworker, next door neighbor, I don't. It doesn't have to be about race relations. It's just about life in general, a spouse. For the next 30 days, to commit to seek to understand. Just say, I'm gonna. Okay, that bugs me. I want to. There's something gurgling up inside wants to say something, but instead, I'm going to seek to understand, and seek to understand some more, and seek to understand some more. Then what happens it doesn't preclude the need to be understood. It just means, as I said, there's a chronological sequence. And it doesn't even guarantee that I will be understood or you will be understood. But I'm thinking what puts a big fat smile on God's face is that when we model something like this and seek to understand, and then what happens is that then if we're understood, it just becomes that much more meaningful. So let's apply this to race relations. So let's say you're talking with someone, a coworker, a child, whatever it might be, about whoever it might be, about something historical or something present, and it's just something, it just doesn't strike you right. You want to say something, or you want to say, yeah, but, and follow it up with whatever you're going to say. Instead, to ask more questions. Why is that important to you? And genuinely want to know, and not have a quick comeback. And why? What is it about that person or that situation that is relevant for today? And then what happens is, I think that once a person feels like they've been heard and listened to genuinely, it's like a flower in fast motion photography starts opening up before you. And I'll tell you a quick illustration. When I was going around the country listening on my listening tour for this book, Return to Glory, uh, and I talk about the suspicion scale, somewhat to extremely suspicious. When I was in the room with African American men asking questions to write a book to young African American men, and they're saying, some guys are saying, you're crazy. If you want to reach young African American males, hide it in a book. Yeah, right. That you're putting in a book that you needs to be in film, it needs to be in sports, it needs to be in music, it needs to be somewhere that way to reach and connect to your audience. But you know what? I asked a question that changed the tone of every single interview, and sometimes took the interviews from 45 minutes to 8 hours. I have folks in my cell phone today that are in my cell phone because of that listening tour. They're now very dear friends. And what happened is, I asked this question: do you remember the moment when you realized that because of the color of your skin, the rules are somehow different for you? And to have a 65-year-old man, elegantly dressed, a lifetime of civil service, sigh, look out the window, and then turn and tell me with brilliant clarity what happened when he was 5 years of age. Could remember what he was wearing, could remember the color of the car, the make of the car almost, what the look on the face of the person, what was said, his parents' reaction when he told them. And that listening, hearing what that person has to say. My point is this, is to seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. If even a 10% of our country would do that, I think we'd see dramatic results in our country in terms of race
That
relations.
is the perfect place that we can land today. Parents who are looking to raise your kids in a way that glorifies the Lord, and just parents who's looking to raise your kids in a way that we all want children to have a better life than what we had. To ask that question, can you remember the day that you experienced? And you can put a number of things in that blank line. That is a powerful, powerful question. And this has been a powerful session. Joel, I want to thank you for your time. I know that you're extremely busy. We just touched on just a tenth today. I like to perhaps have you back and we do it all over again. But let me end with this thank you, and give us once again, finally, very quickly, the website that we can find the materials, and then I'm going to close down.
BH365.org, Black History 365, BH365.org.
I want to encourage every listener to go and go view that website, and hopefully grab a copy. If nothing else, shoot Joel a note. Or, but we need to take this matter to another level. And Joel, thank you so much for the diligent work you and Milton and so many others did on this project. God bless you, my friend. Thank you for your time, and keep playing those Beatles songs.
Thank you.
They're still relevant.
There's
Appreciate you,
there's
brother.
one right there.